On this channel, we're talking a lot about HDR settings in games, but unfortunately hardly about, or not very often, about SDR settings in games. And that's a big mistake, because games like that, especially this game, is a very good example how important it is to have the correct SDR settings. When you start a game for the very first time in SDR, the standard factory settings are actually terrible in my opinion. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's jump into display options and let's go to the brightness setting, and those are the standard settings when I started the game for the very first time. So we have the maximum brightness and the slider is set to the 0 point, I would say. Then we have the minimum brightness, slider is also set to the 0 point. So with 0 point I'm talking about this is minus and this of course is plus. So the standard factory setting is this, which I call 0. So next page is the brightness setting and is also set to 0. So those settings are the standard factory setting, and this is the picture what you're getting then, especially darker areas or shadow details are looking absolutely washed out. This picture is actually not very nice. And it is actually not the first time that I'm experiencing a very bad SDR image quality in Resident Evil games, because as far as I can remember, this is happening with all Resident Evil games so far on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox, PC, when you play the game in SDR. So HDR implementation in those games are actually really good, but SDR is really bad, and this is just a matter of setting the right settings. So before we go into this, very important also, we have this setting here, color space setting, sRGB or Rec 709. So I would actually recommend to leave this at sRGB. And now let's start talking about the brightness setting in the game, and we are skipping the first pattern here. So we are not starting with the maximum brightness setting, we are starting actually with the minimum brightness setting, because this is the most important setting in the game. And all what you have to do here is to decrease this to the minimum level. Do not follow the instruction on the screen, because what I learned is as soon you increase this just by one step, you will have elevated black levels in SDR. So again, make sure this is set to the minimum level and then confirm and confirm again. And now we have to look actually for a bright object like that. And why I like you to find a bright object like this with a lot of fine details in the background is quite simple, because now we're talking about this setting here, the maximum brightness setting. And on my LG CX or the G2, I had no issue to increase this to the maximum level. But because every single TV is different, it is very hard to make a recommendation on this setting here. And to be very honest, I don't trust the in-game settings in Resident Evil at all. I don't trust them. So that's why my recommendation is actually change it or leave it at the factory setting. Make sure that the minimum brightness is set to the minimum and leave the normal brightness as it is for time being. And then you look for a bright object like that. And all what you have to do then is find a very bright object like that, where you have a lot of fine details in the background or in the picture actually, and then you compare your different settings. So start with the standard settings, increase this, and as soon you're losing fine details in this picture here or in your example or sample, then you know you're actually too far. But if you can increase it to the maximum level, as I can do it on the LG CX or G2, you're good to go. And the last setting in the game what we have is called brightness, and this setting is absolutely up to you, because I couldn't find any big problem even you increase this to the maximum. I mean, apart from losing the great contrast in the game, I mean this looks awful now, but this of course is the maximum setting, and I would not recommend to do that. But there is still no problem in terms of elevated black levels, because if there is something which has 0 black or 0 brightness, it is still absolutely black. But again, I mean, game right now looks awful. But if you just increase this a little bit, then there's actually no problem at all. So what I found is that on my LG CX or G2, a setting +1 or +2 is actually not too bad. And I have a very great contrast and a lot of fine details in darker areas. So shadow details, very great with this setting. After we change the SDR settings, the picture quality is actually really good, but let me repeat this again. The most important setting is the minimum brightness setting. Make sure that this setting is set to the minimum value, otherwise you have elevated black levels in the game. Then set up the maximum brightness and do it while you're comparing very bright objects and see if you lose details or not. And last but not least, you have the brightness setting, and this is absolutely up to you. I would recommend to increase it just slightly to keep the great contrast in this game. Okay, my friends, that's it for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And yeah, I have to admit that even in SDR, this game looks actually really good. I mean, we're still talking about the PlayStation 5 version where we have some issues in terms of the visual quality, but I hope this will be fixed at some point, hopefully before I finish the game actually. Anyway, SDR with the correct setting is really nice, a good experience, but I still of course prefer HDR because HDR in this game is really on a great level.